Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast, but as always, with a little nostalgic twist. This week, we're going to be speaking along the lines of a club that we've not really mentioned on this podcast once, have we, Paul? Obviously, I've completely forgot to introduce my co-host, Paul, first before we get into the actual bulk of that. So let's do that first. Hello, Paul. How are you doing?
Hiya, Nick. I'm doing well, mate. I think that's what it is. You know, look, we're just so into the topics that we discussed that you just went straight in there, didn't you? You know,
I think that's it.
We have a chat usually on a daily basis, one way or another, don't we? Through one medium, whether it's text or WhatsApp or recording. So I think
no, that's it. Like I said, we make it look like we think about all these things, like putting on Madrigal Gonzalez episodes on his 35th anniversary of signing for the club, and and other topics which are seemingly aligned quite nicely. But we're just two blokes talk about Spanish football. It's never really that well thought out, is it? But I think today, to be fair, we've got a really good topic to talk about. And as I was saying, it's not a club that we've really mentioned at all, really. It's not a club that a lot of people, especially if they think of modern Spanish football, don't really think about it. It's only really the likes of us that can possibly remember this club sort of like a bit of a height recently, and that club is Racing de Santander, nestled up there on the north coast of Spain. We're going to talk about their incredible 2007-2008 season, aren't we, Paul? Which, to describe it, they just absolutely excelled, way above their weight this season, at a time when Spanish football clubs were starting to become a bit of a force, weren't they, in European football and such?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. This is a club that I think certainly people who are a little bit younger than us may not have many particular memories of them in the top flight, but at the time that we're recording, and we're going to jinx them now, aren't we? But they are doing relatively well in the Segunda at the moment, and it's been a long journey back from which we're not really here to talk about the current affairs, but they are a club that I think are much bigger than their recent history within the Spanish football pyramid would have you believe. They've a stadium in the Cantabria region, which I think can be electric at times. It's not always the most full, but there's always a good atmosphere, and they've had a lot to contend with in the last decade or so. But they are a club that people should know about, and we're going to dive into what was arguably the most successful season in their history, I'd say, certainly in their recent history. And it's also one that I think, because there's a lot that's going on around Spanish football at the time and in the immediate season or two straight after this, that I think perhaps people have maybe forgotten about, or forgotten about what this Racing team achieved at the time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting stuck into this. There's quite a lot to get through, and we will be, talking about the course of the 2007 and 8 season, and the story doesn't really finish at the end of that season. In fact, we will reach a hard stop, but there's a good reason for that, which we'll explain as the episode goes on.
Yes, definitely, and like I say, this is a really interesting story to get into, because at this time we spoke just before we came on air, Paul. This is when Spanish football is really starting to get its claws into being the dominant force in European football, as we just mentioned. You've got, the likes of Frank Rijkaard's Barcelona, who I think just off the back of this season had won the Champions League. They've won it a couple of seasons before as well. You start to see sort of like the Galacticos era, sort of like, was well and truly established by this point. And there was this sort of like undercurrent of everything else in La Liga where everyone else was looking to improve really, really quickly. Now, Racing Santander are a modest club, as you've already mentioned. They got a hell of a stadium in El Sardinero. They've got a really loyal and loud fan base, but they have got limited resources. They are from a part of Spain, which isn't massively populated. It's a bit off the beaten track there on the north coast, and they have got a really good history. We spoke about them. Saying that we've not spoken about them on this podcast, we did mention them in the Black Armbands when we spoke to Brendan Madden on Once Upon a Time in La Liga and such.
Mm-hmm.
This is a club that is built on grit and organisation and belief, as we've already discussed. So heading into the 2008 season, they just avoided relegation quite comfortably the previous season. And essentially their expectation was, we need to consolidate this season. We need to basically just make sure that we're surviving in La Liga. With respect, we are a club that doesn't have the right to be in La Liga automatically. We're not one of those style clubs. We should, make sure that we survive and enter, a young manager at the time, Marcelino Garcia Torel, appointed in June 2007. He came in with a bit of a job on his hand, didn't he, Paul?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So just to clarify, because you did say 2008 season, it's the 2007-8 season. Yeah. No, just because I know there will be one or two people that, as we've seen in the past with some of the comments, if you say the slightest thing. So that's a nice compliment to the attention to detail that people pay when they're listening to us. So, yeah. So as you rightly said there, they arrive on the scene in summer of 2007. Marcelino's appointed at the club. He's inherited a squad that has a couple of veterans, as you could call them, or experienced heads, but he also does add a blend of a couple of new excuse me, a few new faces. Consolidation is the right word, I'd say, would be the expectation. Certainly for a team that had quite a lot of things changing around it. I mean, to be fair with Racing, it does feel like there's a club that there's always kind of things changing on and off the field. But yeah, the aim was, and the expectation was, attempt to consolidate the top flight status. It's fair to say that they exceed that, as we'll get into. A couple of key players, I'd say it's worth just sort of pointing out here that arrive. One of them is Memi Chite, as he's often referred to just as Chite. So he ends up being the top scorer this season. He scores 8 goals for them in the league, but he arrives from Anderlecht. And I forgot really until it came to looking at some of the highlights ahead of this episode, just how he had that sort of edge to him where you think this guy could be prolific if it wasn't for the occasional mistake that he'd make. There's just you never found real consistency, but he had something about him that I always thought, and certainly was reminded of this when I was watching some of the highlights again, that he was quite an exciting player. I think he 8 goals and to be the top scorer for the club is certainly a key part to this game. But I remember him from when he used to get the highlights of European football in the season before when he was playing for Anderlecht. Anyway, you've also got Pedro Menutis, who's the veteran forward, a bit of a leader as well. Aldo Dusha, Giovanni Colsa. There's some names as well that people will remember that were young and promising players. Cesar Navas and one Ezekiel Garay, who became, I know, what a player. And he became a key part to the backbone of this side in this season. Obviously, many people will remember because he had a very long and prominent role at another club in La Liga later in his career, but he played an important part of this, and he was still at a young age. So as you say, it's Marcelino. He's at the time he's he's trying to make do with what he's got, and he's organising the team in a very sort of Marcelino way, where it's I wouldn't say pragmatic approach, but it's having a compact and disciplined unit of players that typically operate in like a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-4, depending on how you look at it and whether they're in possession. But it was that structure that would play an important role. And they were given a tough start to the season. Match day 1 against Barcelona, managed by Frank Rijkaard. And it kind of, that's a bit of a baptism of fire for any club, really, isn't it, to be facing Barcelona in those circumstances, certainly with your new coach's first game in charge.
Well, I think that's it. You look at what you're coming up against in the form of, they're going to have Thierry Henry, they're going to have, Ronaldinho, those kind of players. It's not an ideal start. And I think for Marcelino as well, obviously, his CV, especially now, we look at, what a quality manager he is and the accolades that he's won. At this time, he got Recre de Huelva promoted the season before he got them out of the Spanish Segunda. The last time that the Abuela of Spanish football appeared in La Liga, I don't think he managed to see out the season with them. Before. I think they changed managers in that La Liga season beforehand. But this was a chance for sort of like redemption for him. Clearly, he'd shown enough for the higher ups at Racing to give him the opportunity. And I think he really did sort of like, and he is a manager that learns from his experiences, isn't he? And I think that's definitely what he did for this Santander team. He looked to make them solid, knowing that, on a week-by-week basis, people are going to try and come here and pick us off. If we can fortify El Sardinero and, build a team that can withstand any kind of storm, including, the likes of Barcelona and Real Madrid, etc., we won't be far away. It was quite the season, really, if we come to think about it. We look at maybe the 3 defining moments, Paul. They had a great run in the Copa del Rey, which is, never easy to do. They reached the semi-finals, falling to Getafe, who, I think it was the second year that they'd reached the Copa del Rey final. So obviously, no mean feat losing to those guys in the semi-final. Some absolutely superb home form as well. We've already mentioned Fortress El Sardinero. A superb record at their home ground, didn't they, Paul?
Yeah, 11 wins, 3 draws, 5 defeats. And it was, I think it's one of those stadiums that even now, if you watch certain games, I think it's fair to say that on its day, El Sardinero is a difficult place to go for all sorts of reasons, weather and pitch and everything, but certainly atmosphere plays a big part of it. And that season, you don't get 11 wins at home in the top flight without the fans supporting you, and it has, I think it's got a charm to it as well. I would say that obviously there's an excitement, isn't there, when you feel like you're an underdog anyway. But that can bring out more from the fans as much as anything. But it was vital, and I would say, you look at the first 10 games of the season, they only lose 2 games, and one of them was against Atleti, so that's 4-0 at the Calderon, and then 2-0 against Villarreal. Villarreal, managed by Manuel Pellegrini, who, as everybody who listens regularly will know, is somebody that we hold in the highest regard, not just because of how charming he is and how good he is for a quote and the way that he sets up his teams to play football in an attacking way, but because of how well he does wear a tracksuit as well.
They finished second in that season as well, if I remember rightly, didn't they?
They did, yes. They did. I think it was 77 points behind champions. So not 77 points behind. They finished on 77, which was 18 points behind champions Real Madrid, and crucially 10 points above third place Barcelona. No mean feat, really. Which obviously led to Pellegrini getting another job, which well, we've got to fall down the Pellegrini wormhole here, aren't we?
Let us jump down. Let's bask in it.
We need to park it and save it for when we do a Pellegrini special. Yeah, so back on track. It's a tough start against Barcelona. Then they've got Real Zaragoza, Levante, and then it's that defeat to Atleti. So to kick things off, it's back-to-back draws, 0-0 and then 1-1. And then it's their first win of the season, which is against Levante before reality strikes, and it's a 4-0 thrashing against Javier Aguirre's Atletico Madrid, which was equipped with young Sergio Aguero up front. I think he finished third in the scoring charts that season. Actually,
they just lost Torres as well, haven't they? I think he just moved to Liverpool this season too, if I remember rightly.
It was either this season or season before. I always get confused because I always forget just how young Torres was when he actually left Atleti, and I think you're right. It probably was this season, 07. Yeah, 07.
Yeah, not to go off on a tangent, but I've just done another podcast before this one where we talk about Fernando Torres, the manager, which broke my heart ever so slightly because I'm definitely not old enough for him to be a manager. But also, Alberto Luque's son scored this weekend for Atletico Madrileño, and again, he's still 25, isn't he? You know, he shouldn't be having children that are scoring in Spanish football. So, just sidebar on that one. We're old.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. That's,
sharing the pain.
I can see on the camera that the wrinkles have just all of a sudden become more prominent on my face as you've said that. So they bounced back after 2 defeats in a row to beat Almeria and Valladolid, I think it was, in the next 2 games. And it's a bit of a run then where, as you rightly say, they go into the Copa del Rey. I think the first game is against Malaga, who they beat on aggregate. But they don't actually then lose another game until December, which is pretty phenomenal by anyone's standards. And that is against Real Madrid. So already you think about it, it's not like they're just holding out and doing well against small teams. They've held Barcelona to a 0-0 on the opening game of the season. Yes, they've struggled against Villarreal, Atleti, and Real Madrid, but this is a time, and it is important, as you mentioned before, to talk about the wider picture of La Liga at this period in time. So Getafe, this is the second year in a row that they end up reaching the Copa del Rey final. They're going to lose 3-1 against Valencia. But we're also in a period where Mallorca have still got Dani Guiza, who ends up top scorer of the competition this season. You've got Almeria, who end up, I think they finished, in fact, I've got it written down. Almeria finished 8th that season on 52 points, which, contemporary Almeria would bite your hand off for, wouldn't they? And you've got Depor. Yeah, Depor and Valencia. So Depor finished 9th, Valencia finished 10th. This is the Valencia side that had David Villa, Juan Mata, David Silva.
Yeah. I think Almeida was still around at this point as well, wasn't he?
Yeah. I can't remember if Joaquin's there yet. I think he comes the season after. I have to double check, but it's that Valencia team which you look at and you think, that is Championship manager sort of levels of class, really. But obviously, you didn't have the benefit of that. It's only through hindsight that you look back and you see that.
So anyway, some really powerful clubs, weren't they, at this point? It goes back to the rhetoric we were talking about, where people are sort of on those manoeuvres. They are building up teams which are super competitive, and I think a point of where Racing Santander got to here is when they reach that December time when they lose that game against Real Madrid. That is where you come into the winter break and you start to address and as we mentioned here, you start to believe, don't you? And they go on to finish 6th in this season. On 60 points, 36 of those points are won at El Sardinero as well, which is a colossal amount of. We have the old platitude, which is always as long as you win at home and draw away, you won't be far off. Even winning the league sometimes, and to get UEFA Cup qualification for a team of this size, of where they come from and where they play and things like that, it was very much against the grain.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to say something now that makes me. We talked a moment or two ago about feeling old, but I feel quite old when I say this. But we're talking of a time where we've not quite hit that point in terms of money where there's that huge jump. Obviously, we had the Glasgow era that we did an episode on, 5 years before this, I'd say 4 or 5 years before it. But then it kind of leveled out. La Liga was really competitive, as we saw, because it didn't work out for the Glasgows. But the period in between 2003 to 2008, and I think 2008 to 2009 season was a real turning point. Where we have the second Galactico era, that's when you start to see that jump and that gulf between teams. Whereas
that's Barcelona as well and things like that.
Yeah, it's like the other two then just went, to a different stratosphere or so compared to the rest of the league. But this particular season, I feel like it was a lot more competitive and a lot more balanced. But that shouldn't, if anything, that should add more weight to the credit that I think Racing deserve for what they achieved this season. So as you mentioned, they go on to qualify for the UEFA Cup. They finish 6th on 60 points. And it's kind of, it would surpass all expectations, as we said. Everybody was expecting consolidation. They go on and achieve much more than that. They get into Europe. They reach the semis of the Copa del Rey, losing 4-2 on aggregate to Getafe. But they've set their marker out really as being a team that is ready to mix it up with the big boys and not be pushed around. We're talking about go on.
I was going to say, only finishing 4 points behind the Champions League places as well, which we've got to think of it in this kind of context here. This is when European places were reserved for European places. Do I make sense of that when I'm saying that? It feels like nowadays when you look at, I think last season, is it something like 9 teams from Spain can actually qualify for European football in some way or another now, just by finishing where they finished. This was actually a scramble to make sure you got into those Champions League spots. And, again, I think in this season, Sevilla only miss out to Atleti by the head-to-head. And, Racing Santander only finished 4 points behind them, only 7 points behind Barcelona. This is the magnitude of which we're talking here, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you're right in pointing out the fact that there was fewer European spots. There was that. We're still talking of the period where there was that curious, fair play league qualification, where it came down to a number of yellow cards and red cards, which was done on a strange, random coefficient style thing. It wasn't guaranteed that Spain would get one of those slots. But it does mean that the scramble and the pressure is there to try and get into those European places, and they do it. And like you say, that what really does underline the achievement is the teams that they finish around and ahead of. So we're talking. In fact, I've got the table here. So it's Real Madrid on 85 points, champions. Villarreal on 77, Barcelona on 67, Atleti on 64, Sevilla on 64 as well. And then it's Racing on 60, Mallorca on 59. Don't forget they had Danny Guiza, 27 goals from him. Almeria on 52, Depor on 52, and Valencia on 51. And this is achieved with, probably the most defining moment comes in May with a 1-0 win over Osasuna, because that kind of, it was 86th minute winner that just sort of sent the stadium into a state of euphoria, 20,000 there to witness it. And it was just another achievement that kind of, I would say that there was the cheer of just relief, like they've actually pulled it off and managed to get to what became and still is to this day their highest finish in the top flight.
Yeah, and I think when we look back at Osasuna here as well, it's not as if they were on the beach or anything. Osasuna at the time were still under the threat of relegation. Real Zaragoza could have leapfrogged them into the relegation zone if they got a result on that final day of the season. So they managed to stay up by the skin of the teeth. despite this loss to Racing Santander. But for them to qualify for UEFA Cup, for Marcelino to do this for this side, and obviously then the story that goes on after, which we're not going to get into today.
Mm-hmm.
It's just phenomenal when you come to think about it. And all the emotions that come out of that, and there'll be other Spanish sides that have had sort of like similar feelings. I'm thinking maybe Granada a few years ago when they qualified for the Europa League. It's just you just can't really put a price on that kind of season, can you? They are very much a 1 in a million for a club like Racing Santander. They don't happen every season, and like you say, they have fallen on much harder times in the last sort of decade, going all the way down to the third tier, spending a long time in the third tier as well, struggling to get out of the well, and now seemingly on their way back up again. But they'll always remember that time that we qualified for Europe. That's going to be the main memory for so many fans that are still knocking around today, that are our age, for example.
Absolutely. It is definitely a golden moment. Unfortunately, like you said, we're not going to get into the following season where they're in Europe on this. But we will tell you how you can find out about that shortly. There is, some sort of, I'd probably say what maybe takes the shine off this season a little bit would be the fact that, you've got Marcelino leaves to join Real Zaragoza at the end of the campaign. But it does signify that even the small clubs at the time could small. It's so condescending. I don't mean it in a that way. I don't mean it in a disrespectful way to Racing, but we've talked about some of the clubs that they finished ahead of. This story or this season definitely reminded people within Spanish football that actually anybody can have their moment in the sun if they've got the right chemistry and the right balance. And it feels like and you can watch a lot of the highlights back, and it's this is going to sound silly as well and make us feel old, but I remember at the time, thinking football pitches were pretty decent quality back then. But then when you watch the highlights, you think, oh, actually, they're nothing compared to today's carpets. But it's one of them where I think there was something about this Racing side that they had. I would say they had heart. They really did work together as a unit, and that's a credit to Marcelino. But there was something that there was what do they say about it's not about the size of the dog, the size of the whatever. They had a lot of fight about them. I'm not going to use any more cliches. I know that's something that I often fall into the trap of doing as one of my friends who is a regular listener felt that he could remind me of. So
yeah, and I think from a Marcelino perspective as well is this is his breakout, isn't it? He'd achieved things at Recre de Huelva, but this was sort of like a seismic event for him, which meant he would go on to have a career which would take him to some of the biggest clubs in Spain. Obviously winning the Copa del Rey with Valencia. Despite Valencia's troubles that they've got under Peter Lim, for example. Reaching a Supercopa, winning a Supercopa Athletic Club. 2 Copa del Rey finals with them. Going to Marseille. Achieving with Villarreal as he is right now. And even this move to Real Zaragoza, we were talking about, why would a manager leave a club that's just qualified for the UEFA Cup to go to Real Zaragoza? We've done an episode where we talk about what the pull of Real Zaragoza was at this time, and they were, a really historic, and still are a very historic club. He's sizable at the time. Money to spend. He got to build a squad when he got them back up to the Liga. It didn't quite work out, unfortunately, in the end. But they were a giant to go on to and worth the challenge to get them back into La Liga as well because of their status. So and it's not as if Racing went off and did bad things after that. We'll nod again to what is coming up in the future. Though there was possibly a game you're going to write about in there, Paul. I don't know if you want to mention this now, sort of like the season after. We're going to save it for the future.
No, well, let's get it out there. Like I said, we've come to a bit of a hard stop here. We're not going to carry on the story of what happened in the UEFA Cup for Racing because, as people will know, the issue 2 of Revista El Partido, or the E-zine. Is it E-mag? E-zine? What do you call them?
Digi Magazine, E-Mag,
Digimag. Yeah.
Digimag. There's all sorts of names, isn't there?
Yeah. That. There will be an article, or there is an article, depending on when you're listening, which covers that in the latest issue, which is issue 2, which people can get now, day of release. Yeah, it's out now, isn't it?
Yes, it will be. Yes. I'm just trying to think ahead of where we are right now.
How smooth we are with this, with the recording going on.
Yes, when you've got kids' holidays, things like that in a way, it's like he's actually thinking, what day is it at the minute? But,
yeah.
Yes, it is available right now, so you can go and get a copy of that. And I've read this, Paul. It's a really cool story, and like I say, and a perspective as well from obviously yourself being, a fan of Manchester City. Exciting things were happening for Manchester City around then as well. So it's a really good read, and you should definitely go across there. And I think it really demonstrates, how important this season was for Racing Santander, their fans. It's always going to be the one, the first time qualifying for European football. It's just seismic for them. And even now when we look at, where Racing Santander are, currently top of the Spanish Segunda. They ran it close last season, losing out in the playoffs. You've got a really good manager in Jose Alberto Lopez, which sadly for a Malaga fan, we binned him. We didn't think he was good enough for us, and then we got relegated. But he's now absolutely bossing it in charge of the Cantabrian club. And yeah, it feels like those good days are coming back to Santander as well. I don't know if you saw the plans for the new stadium as well, Paul, that they want to get.
It looks good. I know they've had a bit of a dispute with the local council, but I think that is just going to be a formality now. To be honest, I think it's going to go through, no problem. If it hasn't already, it hadn't on Friday anyway.
Yeah, it looks great. To be fair, I think there's always going to be. A few if, buts, and maybes around things. And we've already mentioned as well how good the Spanish are at building or renovating football stadiums. And this one, again, there might not be too many people who are fully aware of Racing Santander as a club, but their stadium is really quite close to the front there. Santander itself as a city is one that I would highly recommend going visiting if you can do. It is a bit of a hidden gem. On that coastline, and you can get there from the UK semi easily. I think you can fly from like the London airports and from Birmingham occasionally, but it's definitely worth a visit to go and catch a game there because it is, as we said, fantastic.
Yeah, it is, and it's for the Cantabria region, I think it's really important that the club gets the go ahead to renovate the stadium, because at the moment they can only use it for their however many home fixtures there are in Segunda. What's that? 20, 21, 23?
Yeah.
Depending on playoffs, but you can never budget for that. And then obviously if they do end up in a league above them, there'll be even fewer times throughout the year. So they want to develop the stadium into something that can be used on more key dates throughout the year to really get the benefit of the facilities there. So because it's quite it's near the front, but it's also a key part of the community. So it plays a prominent role, and I think if they can, because of where it is within the region, it would offer a lot in terms of bringing different forms of arts and culture, not just sport. And it's an area of Spain that I think it doesn't quite get the attention that it really deserves.
No,
so hopefully the stadium goes ahead and the club can start using it for other things, and the city will benefit from that. And if you're within a chance of going to Santander, then make sure you do. I believe as well that there's a very good cuisine around there. I believe that the food is particularly good in that part of the world as well. I mean, it is everywhere in Spain, really, isn't it?
Yes.
If you can't
but
find
this
a
is
good
some of the
meal,
best.
Yeah, that's it.
And who knows, in 10 years' time, there might be two young and up and coming podcasters doing a nostalgic podcast on the 2020s era of football, and they'll be talking maybe about, Real Racing Club de Santander qualifying for Europe in their shiny new stadium. Who knows? It definitely seems like football is back up on the up in Santander at the moment. So, that was a fantastic little look back at the 2007-2008 season. Definitely worth going back and watching some of the highlights for Santander and a lot of the other clubs as well. Some of the names you've just mentioned there, Paul. Danny Guisa, 27 goals. Even looking at that top scorer list for the Pachichi, Luis Fabiano is in second, if you can remember him, for Sevilla. You had Raul, obviously, up there, David Villa, Diego Forlan for Atleti in his first season with Atleti too, Ruud van Nistelrooy for Real Madrid, Frederick Canute is in there too. There's plenty of people mentioned, and even looking down to the goalkeepers as well. Carlos Kemeny for Espanyol. Oh, just what a legend. So yes, definitely go check that out. Check out the magazine as well, which has got the follow-up article for Santander's time in Europe and how they fared in the UEFA Cup that season. We've got some other great articles in there as well, such as Matt Harrison visiting Huelva to go and watch the abuelo of Spanish football, which is absolutely fantastic. We've also got an article from him focused on his love of Championship Manager 97-98, which you also mentioned in one of your articles, Paul, which is quite a nice little parallel. So yeah, definitely worth checking out.
It's like we plan these things, isn't it? Anyone would think that there's this just, and it's not. It's just pure fluke,
pure coincidence. But yes, definitely worth checking that out. And obviously go back and listen to some more other episodes as well. The good thing about El Partido is it's not constricted by time. We've got some fantastic interviews with authors such as Brendan Madden and Christopher Evans. We've got the Guillem Balaguer interview. You can go all the way back to the beginning to learn more about Rafa Benitez, Paul, who obviously this week was announced as the Panathinaikos manager. Who would have saw that coming? The richest manager in Greece at the moment, and loads of other stuff in between as well. So do go check it out and make sure to give us 5 stars while you're there, because it really does help us spread the word of all things El Partido. But for now, I'll say thank you to you, Paul. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Likewise, have a great one, Nick. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. I can't wait for the next episode.
Yes, and we'll see you again soon, the listeners. Thank you very much for listening to El Partido. We'll catch you then. Hasta luego.